The bass throbbed through the waterfront bar in Coronado, vibrating the salt-stained windows that overlooked the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Kira Vance sat alone at the corner of the bar, her civilian clothes deliberately unremarkable faded jeans, a navy Henley scuffed leather jacket. Her dark blonde hair fell loose past her shoulders, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. The bourbon in her glass caught the neon light, amber and gold, untouched. She'd been watching the crowd for 20 minutes, cataloging exits, counting the number of sailors who'd already had too many, nodding the MPs who lingered near the pool tables. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive in places where 1 second of inattention meant you didn't come home. The Marine hit her from behind like a freight train. She didn't spill her drink. Muscle memory kept her hand steady even as 200 pounds of drunk enthusiasm slammed into her shoulder, spinning her halfway off the bar stool. The glass stayed level. The bourbon didn't even ripple. "Jesus, watch it." The voice belonged to a staff sergeant mid-20s, buzz cut so fresh his scalp still showed pink. His friends clustered behind him, all shoulders and swagger, their laughter cutting through the music. "You okay, ma'am?" The title came out mocking, stretched thin with condescension. Kira set the glass down carefully. "Fine. Didn't see you there." He grinned, all teeth, leaning against the bar like he owned it. His name tape read MORRISON. Pretty dark corner for a pretty lady. "You waiting for someone?" "No." "Military," one of his friends asked, eyeing her posture, the way she held herself. "Some things you couldn't hide no matter what you wore." "Used to be." The lie came easy, technically accurate. She'd resigned her commission 3 months ago, right before they'd quietly reinstated it with a promotion and a new assignment so classified it didn't officially exist. Morrison laughed, harsh and sudden. "Let me guess, Navy Admin, Supply Corps." His friends joined in, a chorus of derision that made the bartender wince and turn away. "That's cute, real cute, you know what's down the street." He jerked his thumb toward the windows, toward the compound that sprawled across the peninsula like a fortress. "SEAL Team 7, real operators, the kind who do actual work." Kira picked up her bourbon, sipped it, let the burn settle in her throat before she answered. "I know." "Yeah," Morrison leaned closer, breathing beer and arrogance. "You know any of them." She could have walked away, should have. The smart play was always to disengage, to let drunk idiots be drunk idiots, to save the confrontation for when it mattered. But there was something about the way he said "Atrial operators" that sparked something cold and sharp behind her sternum. Something that had been building for years, through every dismissive comment, every assumption, every room she'd walked into where grown men looked past her like she was furniture. "A few," she set the glass down again, met his eyes. "Do you?" The Coronado bar had a reputation, the kind whispered about in ready rooms and briefing spaces across Naval Special Warfare Command. It was where SEALs went to disappear, where Delta operators on liaison assignments drank in silence, where the sailors who kept the machines running came to forget the weight of what they carried. The owner, a former Master Chief with a prosthetic leg and a 1,000-yard stare, didn't ask questions. He didn't keep a tab for anyone who wore the trident, and he'd thrown out a 2-star admiral once for getting handsy with a waitress. The walls were covered in photographs, frogmen from Vietnam, desert raiders from the Gulf, faces young and old, some alive, many not. Memorial bracelets hung behind the bar, silver and copper and gold, each one a name that wouldn't come home. Morrison didn't know any of this. His deployment patch said Afghanistan 2023, a 6-month rotation in Kabul after the withdrawal, garrison duty dressed up as combat experience. Respectable, honorable even, but not the kind of work that taught you to read a room. "I know plenty," he said, puffing up. "My co used to run with DEVGRU guys, said half of them wash out before they even get to selection." Kira nodded slowly. "That's accurate." "You sound like you know a lot about it." Suspicion crept into his voice now, mixing with the alcohol. "For someone who was in supply." "I read." One of Morrison's friends, a corporal with sergeant stripes sewn crooked on his sleeve, squinted at her. "You look familiar. Were you stationed here?" "On and off." The bartender, old Master Chief Ridgway, caught her eye from down the bar. His expression said what his mouth wouldn't walk away, Commander. This isn't worth it. But Kira had spent 15 years walking away from drunk jarheads who thought the Navy was just ships and paperwork, from fighter jocks who assumed helicopters were for passengers, from conventional forces who believed special operations was a boys' club with a velvet rope. She'd walked away from senators who'd asked if she really thought women belonged in combat, from admirals who'd suggested she'd be happier in a training role, from teammates who'd died because someone higher up the chain hadn't trusted her read on a situation. Tonight she didn't feel like walking. "What's your name?" Morrison asked, emboldened by her silence. "Kira. Just Kira. Just Kira." He grinned again, wolfish, playing to his audience. "Well, just Kira, since you know so much about SEALs, maybe you can settle something for us." He gestured to his friends, who leaned in like this was the best entertainment they'd had all week. "My buddy here thinks women are gonna be allowed into SEAL training soon. I say that's bullshit. I say there's a reason it's been men only for 60 years. What do you think?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around them, conversations dimmed. Other patrons turned slightly, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Ridgway set down the glass he'd been cleaning, his jaw tight. Kira took another sip of bourbon. Let the silence stretch until Morrison's grin started to falter. "I think," she said quietly, "that particular policy changed 4 years ago." The change in atmosphere was immediate but subtle, like the moment before a storm when the air pressure drops and every animal knows to seek shelter. Morrison's smile froze. His friend, the corporal, went very still, his eyes widening slightly as something clicked into place. A memory, maybe, or a photograph he'd seen somewhere official. "And I think," Kira continued, her voice carrying now despite its softness, "that 3 women made it through the full pipeline. 2 got injured during Hell Week. The 3rd graduated." "Bullshit," Morrison said, but the word lacked conviction. "I would have heard about that." "It wasn't publicized." She turned on her barstool to face him fully now, her posture relaxed but her gaze absolutely level. NAVSBCWAR decided that treating it like a circus wouldn't benefit anyone. The woman who graduated, she didn't want press. She wanted to do the job. "And where is she now?" the corporal asked quietly, his face pale. Ridgway made a sound that might have been a cough, or might have been a suppressed laugh. Kira didn't smile. "Depends on the day." Morrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His face cycled through expressions: confusion, dawning horror, aggressive denial. "You're saying you're no way, you're fucking with us." "Am I?" The atmosphere in the bar had shifted completely now. The pool games had stopped. Sailors who'd been minding their own business were turning, some with expressions of recognition, others with calculation, all of them suddenly very aware that something significant was happening in the corner by the windows. A voice cut through the tension, deep and amused, carrying the unmistakable authority of a senior enlisted sailor who'd seen everything twice. "Morrison, you fucking idiot." The speaker emerged from the crowd, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with a weathered face and Master Chief anchors on his collar. His eyes held the particular brand of exhaustion that came from babysitting junior sailors who didn't know when to shut up. He looked at Kira, and his expression transformed into something between respect and apology. "Commander Vance, didn't know you were stateside." Morrison's face went from red to white. The Master Chief wasn't done. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Lieutenant Commander Kira Vance, call sign Phantom." He let that sink in before continuing. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group liaison, former Night Stalkers pilot, distinguished Flying Cross recipient, and as of 3 months ago, the commander of SEAL Team 7 Special Operations Aviation Detachment." He paused. Also the woman whose helicopter pulled your battalion's asses out of Helmand Province when you were still in high school. The silence that followed was absolute. Kira stood slowly, leaving money on the bar more than enough to cover her drink and Morrison's tab. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, no triumph, just a weary kind of patience. The woman who graduated Bud S. wasn't me. I came up through a different pipeline 160 SOAR, then DVGRU support, then cross-training that doesn't have a public name. She looked at Morrison, who seemed to be trying to disappear into the floor. But she's real. Her name is Lieutenant Sarah Chen. She's probably on an operation right now that you'll never hear about, doing work that'll keep you safe and you'll never know it happened. She picked up her jacket. As for women in special operations, you're right about one thing. There's a reason it took 60 years. It's because we spent 60 years assuming that upper body strength was more important than problem-solving under pressure, that being able to bench press your body weight mattered more than being able to think your way out of an ambush, that looking like a traditional warrior was more valuable than actually being one. She shrugged into the jacket, leather creaking. Turns out, the job requires all of it. And some women can do all of it, just like some men can't. Morrison found his voice small and strangled. I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't know who I am, she finished for him. That's the point, Staff Sergeant, you didn't know. You saw someone you assumed was weak, was irrelevant, was less than. You made a judgment based on what you thought you saw instead of gathering intelligence first. She tilted her head slightly. That's a good way to get killed in the field, or at minimum, it's a good way to look like an asshole in a bar. She moved toward the door, the crowd parting like water. But she paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder at Morrison and his friends, who stood frozen in various attitudes of mortification. Do you know who I am? She repeated his earlier question, letting it hang in the air. Next time someone asks you that, consider the possibility that the answer might surprise you. The door swung shut behind her, letting in a gust of salt air and the distant sound of waves against the seawall. For a long moment, nobody in the bar moved. Then Ridgway started laughing, a low rumble that built into something approaching genuine mirth. You boys, he said, shaking his head, are so fucked if your co hears about this. Morrison sank onto the barstool Kira had vacated, his head in his hands. The corporal, still pale, pulled out his phone and started scrolling, probably searching for confirmation, for photographs, for any evidence that what had just happened was real. The other Marines scattered, suddenly interested in their own drinks, their own conversations, anything but the disaster they'd just witnessed. The Master Chief, who'd outed Kira's identity, ordered a beer and settled in at the bar, his expression satisfied. He'd served with Vance on a joint task force in Syria, back when she was still flying Blackhawks into hot LZs and pulling entire SEAL platoons out of situations that had gone sideways. He'd watched her keep a damaged helicopter in the air for 40 minutes on one engine in pure determination, refusing to let it drop until every man was across the border. He'd seen her walk away from the wreckage afterward, bleeding from a head wound she hadn't mentioned, and immediately start the after-action report because that's what you did, you finished the job. Some people wore their competence like armor, loud and obvious. Vance wore hers like a second skin, so integral to who she was that she didn't think about it. That was dangerous in a world that still expected women to prove themselves twice as hard for half the credit. But it was also the mark of someone who'd internalized excellence so completely that external validation had become irrelevant. The Master Chief sipped his beer and wondered idly if Morrison would learn from this. Probably not. Most people didn't. They'd tell the story, embellishing their own heroism, turning their humiliation into something they could live with. They'd say they'd known all along, that they'd been testing her, that it was all a joke. They'd rewrite history because the alternative, accepting that they'd been completely, embarrassingly wrong, was too painful. But maybe one of them would remember. Maybe one of them would carry this moment forward, would hesitate before making assumptions, would look a little deeper before judging. That was the optimistic take. Ridgway caught his eye and raised an eyebrow. The Master Chief raised his beer in return, a silent toast to a woman who didn't need their defense but who'd earned their respect so thoroughly that they gave it anyway. Outside, the Pacific wind carried the taste of storms building far offshore. Kira walked along the seawall, hands in her pockets, letting the wind pull at her hair. The Coronado base sprawled to her left, lights glowing against the darkness barracks and training facilities, the obstacle course where Bud S candidates learned that their bodies could endure more than their minds believed possible, the pools where they practiced underwater not tying until their lungs screamed, the compound where SEAL teams planned operations that would never make the news. She'd been here for 3 months, officially. Unofficially, she'd been in and out of this base for 15 years, ever since she'd graduated flight school and been selected for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers took only the best, and even then, most washed out. She'd made it through on her second attempt, after spending a year flying medevac missions in Afghanistan and learning what it meant to land a helicopter on a mountainside in a whiteout while people died in the back. The 160th had taught her precision. DEVGRU had taught her patience. The Joint Task Forces in Syria and Yemen and half a dozen other places that didn't officially exist had taught her that sometimes the difference between success and failure was knowing when to break the rules. And now she commanded the aviation detachment for SEAL Team 7, responsible for getting operators into and out of situations where conventional air support couldn't or wouldn't go. It was a position that technically existed but that nobody talked about, a role that required someone who could fly like a night stalker, think like a SEAL, and navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of joint special operations without losing their mind. They'd offered it to her because she was good. They'd also offered it to her because she was a useful symbol proof that naval special warfare was serious about integration, about leveraging talent regardless of gender. She'd accepted because the work mattered, and because turning it down would have felt like giving up. But there were days when she missed the simplicity of just being a pilot, when the only thing that mattered was keeping the aircraft steady and bringing everyone home. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, squinting at the screen in the darkness. A message from the Team 7 commander, Captain Marcus Webb. Heard you had an incident at Ridgway's. You good? She typed back, fine, just educating the next generation. The response came immediately. Morrison's co already called. Wants to apologize personally. I told him you didn't need it. Appreciate that. Brief at 600, we got something. That was it. No details, no context. Just something, which in their world could mean anything from a training exercise to a crisis that would redefine the next 6 months of her life. She'd learned to read Webb's terseness like a language short messages meant he was busy, which meant something significant was developing. She texted back a thumbs up and pocketed the phone. The walk back to her quarters took 20 minutes. She lived in officer housing near the water, a small apartment that she'd barely decorated. There was a couch, a table, a bed. Her go-bag stayed packed by the door, always ready because that was the job. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of her flight school class, 32 pilots who'd started together, 18 who'd finished. She was the only woman in the photo, standing in the back row, her expression serious and focused. Half of those pilots were dead now. Training accidents, combat losses, a helicopter that had simply stopped responding over the Hindu Kush and plummeted into a valley so remote that it took 3 weeks to recover the bodies. She kept the photograph because forgetting felt like a betrayal, but looking at it too long made her chest tight with a grief that never quite faded. She showered, mechanically efficient, and fell into bed without bothering to close the curtains. The Pacific gleamed beyond the window, vast and unknowable, the same ocean that had carried warriors and explorers and refugees for millennia. Somewhere out there in the darkness, operators were moving through water and sky and hostile territory, doing the work that kept the world from sliding into chaos. Tomorrow she'd join them. Tonight she let herself be just Kira, not Commander, not Phantom, just a woman who'd made choices that had led her here and who would make more choices tomorrow that might keep people alive or might get them killed. Sleep came quickly, dreamless and deep. The briefing room at 600 was already full when Kira arrived. SEAL Team 7's senior leadership clustered around a conference table, Captain Webb at the head, his executive officer commander James Rourke to his left, the operations officer and intelligence officer flanking them. The Master Chief stood along the wall, their presence a reminder that in special operations, rank mattered less than competence and experience mattered most of all. Kira took a seat near the back, nodding to the other officers. They nodded back, professional and courteous. She'd earned their respect through months of joint exercises and live operations, proving that she could keep a helicopter steady in situations where most pilots would have aborted. Trust in this community wasn't given, it was earned through repeated demonstrations of competence under pressure. Webb didn't waste time. "Gentlemen, Commander Vance, we have a situation developing in the Makran Coast region." He clicked a remote, and a map appeared on the screen. The southern coast of Iran, a desolate stretch of mountains and coastline where the Persian Gulf met the Arabian Sea. 72 hours ago, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps captured a U.S. citizen, Daniel Reeves, a journalist who was documenting human rights abuses in Balochistan. He's being held at a facility near Jask. The room went quiet. Operations on Iranian soil were politically complex, diplomatically explosive, and operationally challenging. The IRGC didn't take prisoners lightly, and any attempt to retrieve them risked escalating into something much larger. "State Department has been negotiating for his release," Webb continued. "As of yesterday, those negotiations broke down. IRGC is threatening a show trial, likely execution. We have 72 hours before they move him to Tehran, at which point retrieval becomes effectively impossible." He clicked again. The screen shifted to satellite imagery, a compound nestled against a cliff face, surrounded by desert, accessible by a single road that wound through the mountains like a scar. "This is the facility, former military outpost, now used as a detention center for high-value prisoners. Guards are IRGC Quds Force experienced, well-trained, not the conscripts you find at border checkpoints. Intelligence suggests 20 to 30 personnel on site, rotating shifts, heavy weapons, communication with regional command." Rourke leaned forward. "Exfil options." "Limited," the intelligence officer, a lieutenant commander named Patricia Akafer, responded. She was Navy intelligence, seconded to SEAL Team 7 for her expertise in Iranian military capabilities. "The compound is 90 kilometers from the coast, accessible by one road. Air assets would be detected crossing Iranian airspace. Ground infiltration would require days of movement through hostile territory. Our window is narrow. They're moving Reeves in 72 hours, which means we need to hit the facility, extract him, and get out before their quick reaction force arrives." Kira studied the map, her mind already calculating distances, fuel loads, ingress and egress routes. 90 kilometers inland was a stretch for conventional helicopters operating without refueling, especially if they needed to maintain low altitude to avoid radar. The terrain was mountainous, which provided cover but also limited flight paths. Webb's eyes found hers. "Commander Vance, what are we looking at for aviation support?" She stood, moving to the map. Standard approach would be MH-60s from the Reagan Battle Group. They're operating in the Gulf of Oman, about 200 nautical miles from the target. She traced a line on the map with her finger. "But crossing the coast puts us on Iranian radar. They've upgraded their air defense network significantly in the last 2 years. S-300 systems covering major installations, mobile units that can relocate rapidly. A direct approach gets detected, which means their Air Force scrambles, which means we're fighting our way out." "Alternatives," Webb's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. He already knew what she was going to say. This was theater, a way of bringing the rest of the room along. We go low and slow. Use the terrain. The Makran coast is all mountains and wadis. If we stay in the valleys, fly nap of the earth, we can avoid most of their radar coverage. It's risky, especially at night, but it's doable. One of the master chiefs, a grizzled senior chief named Mike Kowalski, grunted. Doable for you, maybe. Most pilots wouldn't try threading a helicopter through mountain passes in the dark. Most pilots aren't here, Kira said simply. And we'd use modified MH-60s with the defensive suite, upgraded radar warning receivers, infrared countermeasures, additional armor. I'd want 2 birds, one for the assault team, one for backup and covering fire. We land outside the compound, team goes in on foot, we extract and run the same route out. Akafar shook her head. The timeline is tight. Insertion would be around 200 local time to maximize darkness, but that gives the team maybe 90 minutes on target before we start losing the cover of night. If something goes wrong, if the assault takes longer, if Reeves is injured, if we take fire, we could be flying out in daylight. Then we don't let something go wrong, Rourke said, his tone flat. He was a veteran of more operations than Kira had years in the service, a SEAL whose reputation included successfully extracting a downed pilot from Somalia and leading a direct-action raid in Syria that had eliminated an ISIS commander. When he said something was doable, people listened. Webb looked around the room. I need to know if this is feasible. Not if it's easy, not if it's safe, if it's feasible. Can we get our people in, get Reeves out, and make it home? The question hung in the air. Every person in the room understood what was really being asked. Are you willing to stake your reputation, your career, and potentially your life on this operation? Kira met Webb's eyes. Yes, sir, it's feasible. Master Chief Kowalski, can your team breach the facility and secure Reeves within 90 minutes? Kowalski's face was stone. If the intelligence is accurate, yes. If there are more guards than reported, if the facility layout doesn't match the satellite imagery, if Reeves is injured or drugged, those are variables we can't control. But under optimal conditions, we can do it. Optimal conditions don't exist in our line of work, Webb said, but I'll take possible over impossible. Commander Vance, you have 48 hours to prep your aircraft and run simulations. Master Chief, brief your team and run rehearsals. I want every contingency planned for, every failure point identified. This goes sideways. A lot of people will have opinions about who's responsible. He stood, signaling the end of the brief. One more thing. This operation is classified at the highest level. No communication outside this room. No calls home. No casual mentions to teammates not read into the mission. Operational security is paramount. If Iranian intelligence gets wind of this, Reeves is dead and we're starting a diplomatic crisis that could escalate into open conflict. Everyone nodded. In the Special Operations community, OPSEC was religion. Loose lips didn't just sink ships, they got operators killed and missions compromised. The room emptied quickly, officers and enlisted personnel dispersing to begin their preparations. Kira lingered, studying the map, committing the terrain to memory. Webb approached, his expression thoughtful. You sure about this? He asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears only. No, she admitted. But I'm sure we can't leave an American citizen to be executed on international television. Fair point. He paused. Morrison's co called me this morning. Apparently his staff sergeant had a revelation last night about the importance of not being a jackass. Despite everything, Kira smiled faintly. Good for him. The co wanted me to pass along an apology. I told him you didn't need it, but he was insistent. Said Morrison would be writing a formal letter and that he'd be attending sensitivity training. Christ, Kira muttered. I don't want the kid's career ruined over a drunk mistake. Too late, word got out. Half the base knows about it by now. Webb's expression was wry. You're a legend, Commander. The pilot who shut down a Marine with 3 sentences. It'll be a sea story for the next decade. Wonderful. She turned back to the map, focusing on the mission instead of her unwanted notoriety. I'll need access to the most recent satellite imagery, weather forecasts for the next 72 hours, and detailed specs on the Iranian air defense network. Akafir will get you everything. She's good best intelligence officer I've worked with. He hesitated, then added, "This operation is high risk, Kira. If you have doubts, now's the time to voice them." "I always have doubts," she said. "That's what keeps me alive, but the mission is feasible and Reeves deserves a chance. That's enough." Webb nodded slowly. 48 hours, make it count. He left, and Kira was alone with the map, with the satellite imagery showing a compound that held an American citizen, and the mountains that would either hide her approach or become her grave. She thought about Morrison, about the assumptions he'd made, about the shock on his face when his worldview collided with reality. She thought about the photograph in her quarters, about the pilots who hadn't made it home. She thought about Daniel Reeves, a journalist who'd gone to a war zone to tell stories that needed telling, and who was now paying the price for that courage. And then she stopped thinking and started planning, because that's what you did when lives were on the line, and the mission was all that mattered. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless cycle of preparation, simulation, and contingency planning. Kira lived in the operations center, surviving on coffee and adrenaline, poring over satellite imagery until she could navigate the Makran coast blindfolded. She studied the weather-patterned seasonal winds that could buffet a helicopter against cliff faces, temperature inversions that would affect rotor performance, the likelihood of dust storms that could ground the entire operation. She flew simulator runs with her co-pilot, a quiet warrant officer named Tom Chen who'd spent a decade in the 160th before transferring to SEAL support. Chen was methodical and unflappable, the kind of pilot who could maintain formation spacing in a sandstorm. They practiced the ingress route until their hands moved on the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over, every turn and altitude change programmed into their nervous systems. The MH-60s were prepped in a secure hangar, their systems upgraded with the latest defensive countermeasures. Kira personally inspected every aircraft, checking fuel lines, examining rotor blades for microfractures, testing the defensive suite that would warn them of incoming missiles. She trusted the maintenance crews. They were the best in the Navy. But this was her aircraft, her responsibility, and she wouldn't delegate final inspection to anyone. Master Chief Kowalski's team ran rehearsals on a mock-up of the Iranian compound, practicing the breach, the room clearances, the extraction. They were a 12-man element, each one a veteran of multiple deployments, each one capable of operating independently or as part of a coordinated assault. Kira watched them work and was reminded why SEALs had the reputation they did. This wasn't bravado or Hollywood heroics. It was precision choreographed through thousands of hours of training. On the second evening, Akafir found her in the operations center, staring at a three-dimensional terrain model that showed every ridge and valley between the coast and the target compound. "You should sleep," Akafir said, setting down a coffee that Kira hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "I'll sleep when we're wheels up." Kira took the coffee, savoring the heat. "What's the latest on Iranian force disposition?" "No change. The Quds force rotation at the compound is holding steady. 26 personnel as of the last satellite pass. No indication they're reinforcing, which suggests they don't know we're coming." Akafir pulled up a chair, settling in. "But there's something else. Signals intelligence picked up increased communication between the compound and IRGC Regional Command. They're discussing the transfer timeline. Reeves is definitely being moved in 72 hours, just like we thought. Which means we have one shot at this." Kira traced a route on the terrain model, her finger following the path she'd fly. "If we miss the window, he's gone." "No pressure," Akafir said dryly. Then more seriously, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." Why'd you take this assignment? You could have stayed with the 160th, flown the big missions, built a conventional career. Instead, you're here, running ops that nobody will ever know about, working with SEALs who'll never fully accept an outsider. Kira was quiet for a moment, considering the question. You ever read Marcus Aurelius? Akafor blinked at the non sequitur. The Roman Emperor, Meditations. Yeah, there's a line in there. Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. Kira set down her coffee, her eyes still on the terrain model. I spent years arguing with people about whether women belonged in combat aviation, whether we had the physical strength, the mental toughness, the ability to handle stress. And then I realized arguing was pointless. The only thing that mattered was doing the job so well that the argument became irrelevant. And has it, Akafor asked, become irrelevant? Not yet, maybe not ever, Kira shrugged. But I can live with that. I can't live with knowing there was a mission I could have flown, someone I could have brought home, and I didn't because I was worried about what people thought. Akafor nodded slowly. For what it's worth, the team respects you. Kowalski told me yesterday that he'd fly with you over half the pilots in the Navy. Only half, Kira's lips quirked. The man's a perfectionist. Half is practically a marriage proposal. Akafor stood, stretching. Get some rest, Commander. Tomorrow's going to be hell and you'll need to be sharp. She left, and Kira was alone again with the maps and models, with the weight of what was coming. She thought about Reeves, wondered what he was thinking in his cell, if he knew rescue was coming or if he'd given up hope. She thought about the SEALs who would trust her to get them in and out safely, about Tom Chen who would fly beside her, about the chain of decisions and contingencies that separated success from catastrophic failure. And then, finally, she allowed herself to think about the possibility that this could go wrong, that she could die in a mountain pass in Iran, that her name would be added to the classified list of operators who'd fallen in missions that never officially happened. It didn't frighten her as much as it should have. That worried her more than the mission itself. She slept for 4 hours, a deep, dreamless void, and woke to her alarm at 400 feeling clearer than she had in days. Mission day. The sky outside was still dark, stars sharp and bright over the Pacific. Somewhere across that ocean, across thousands of miles of water and hostile territory, Daniel Reeves was waiting. Kira dressed in her flight suit, checked her gear, and headed to the hangar. The MH-60s sat like predators in the half-light, their rotors folded back, their surfaces matte black to reduce radar signature. Maintenance crews moved around them with practiced efficiency, performing final checks, loading ammunition for the door guns, topping off fuel tanks. The smell of JP-8 fuel and hydraulic fluid filled the air, familiar and oddly comforting. Tom Chen was already there, performing his own pre-flight inspection. He looked up as Kira approached, nodding once. No words necessary. They'd flown together enough times that communication had become almost telepathic. Kowalski's team arrived in tactical vehicles, 12 men in full kit-body armor, helmets, weapons, enough ammunition to fight their way through a small army. They moved with the economy of motion that marked elite operators, no wasted energy, every gesture purposeful. Kowalski himself looked like he'd been carved from granite, his face impassive as he checked his team's equipment. Webb appeared from the operations center, flanked by Rourke. The captain's expression was grim but determined. Final brief in 10 minutes, he announced. Weather check came back favorable, clear skies, minimal wind. Iranian air defense network is normal posture, no indication of heightened alert. Intelligence confirms Reeves is still at the compound, no change in guard rotation. He looked at Kira, aviation. We're ready, sir. Both aircraft are fueled and armed, defensive systems tested and operational. Flight plan filed, contingencies mapped. We'll launch at 5:30, cross the coast at 6:45, arrive on target at 800 local time. Ground element. Kowalski stepped forward. Team is good to go. Breach charges prepped, extraction plan rehearsed. We hit the compound, secure Reeves, and back to the birds within 90 minutes. Webb nodded, satisfied. Then let's get this done. Remember, operational security is critical. This mission succeeds or fails based on speed and surprise. We get in before they know we're there. We get out before they can respond. Simple concept, hard execution. He paused, his eyes moving across the assembled operators. I don't need to tell you what's at stake. Reeves is counting on us. The families of everyone we've brought home are counting on us. The families of everyone we'll bring home in the future are counting on us. We do this right, we set a standard. We do this wrong. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Questions? Silence. Then let's move. The briefing was quick and professional. Final review of the plan, confirmation of radio frequencies, synchronization of watches. Kira absorbed it all, her mind already shifting into mission mode, the pre-flight anxiety burning away in the face of clear objectives and concrete tasks. At 5:30, the first MH-60 lifted off from Coronado, its rotors beating the air into submission. Kira was at the controls, Chen beside her, 6 SEALs in the back with their weapons ready and their expressions calm. The second bird followed 30 seconds later, maintaining separation but staying close enough to provide support if needed. They flew west toward the open ocean, the California coast falling away behind them. The Pacific stretched below, dark and vast, swallowing the helicopter's shadow. Kira flew on instruments, trusting her training, her hands light on the controls. The MH-60 responded like an extension of her body, every input smooth and precise. 2 hours later, they rendezvoused with the Reagan Battle Group, a carrier strike group that officially didn't know they existed. The helicopters landed on the carrier's deck just long enough to refuel, hot refueling with rotors still turning, and then they were airborne again, racing toward the coastline of Iran. The sun was rising behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kira descended to 50 feet above the water, the helicopter skimming the waves, staying below radar coverage. The defensive systems were active now, screens showing the threat environment. Mediterranean radar sites lighting up along the coast, search patterns sweeping the Gulf, but nothing tracking them directly. Chen's voice was calm in her headset. Coast in 2 minutes. Copy? Kira's eyes scanned the horizon, picking out the dark line of land that marked the Iranian shore. All stations, this is Phantom 1, going tactical. She pushed the cyclic forward and the MH-60 dropped even lower, 10 feet above the water now, spray from the rotor wash creating a veil around them. Behind her, Phantom 2 mirrored her movements, the 2 helicopters dancing across the Gulf like ghosts. The coastline rushed toward them, cliffs and rocks and the harsh beauty of the Makran. Kira pulled up slightly, threading the helicopter between rock formations, using the terrain to mask her approach. The radar warning receiver stayed quiet. They were invisible, at least for now. And then they were over land, flying up a wadi that cut through the mountains like a wound. The helicopter's belly barely clearing the rocks. Kira's entire focus narrowed to the path ahead and the instruments that told her she was still alive. 90 kilometers to target. 60 minutes of flying through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, with an entire nation's military waiting to kill them if they were detected. Kira's hands were steady on the controls. This was the job. This was what she'd trained for. The mountains rose around them like titans, ancient and indifferent, their flanks scarred by millennia of wind and water. Kira flew through the valleys with the precision of a surgeon, every adjustment to the cyclic and collective calculated to keep them hidden from Iranian radar while avoiding the cliff faces that could tear a helicopter apart. The terrain was hostile in a way that went beyond mere difficulty. The wadis twisted unpredictably, narrowing without warning, forcing Kira to make split-second decisions about whether to climb or find an alternate route. Thermal updrafts from the sun-baked rocks buffeted the aircraft, trying to push them into the mountains. The GPS showed their position, but the satellite imagery they'd studied couldn't capture the reality of navigating through stone corridors at 140 knots. Chen called out waypoints and altitude, his voice a steady anchor. Checkpoint Alpha in 30 seconds, climbing terrain ahead. Kira eased the collective up, the helicopter rising to clear a ridgeline. For 5 seconds they were exposed, silhouetted against the sky, and then they dropped back into the safety of the valley on the far side. The radar warning receiver chirped once, a search radar sweeping past them, but didn't lock on. They were too low, too fast, too close to the ground for the Iranian systems to distinguish them from the terrain clutter. In the back, Kowalski and his team sat in silence, their faces calm, their weapons ready. They'd learned long ago that there was nothing they could do during the flight except trust the pilots. Second-guessing, nervous chatter, fear, all of it was worse than useless. So they sat, professionals waiting for the moment when their skills would be required. 30 minutes into the flight, they passed over a small village, mud brick houses clustered around a well, a few goats grazing on sparse vegetation. Kira caught a glimpse of a child looking up, mouth open in surprise at the sudden appearance of a black helicopter screaming through the valley. Then they were past, gone before anyone could react. Checkpoint Bravo, Chen announced. 45 kilometers to target. Halfway there. Kira's shoulders were tight from the constant tension of flying nap of the earth, but her hands remained steady. She could feel the aircraft around her, every vibration, every subtle change in the rotor's pitch. The MH-60 was straining, flying this low, this fast in this heat, pushed the engines close to their limits. But the bird was holding together, the maintenance crew's work proving its worth. Behind her, Phantom II maintained position, the second helicopter flying 30 seconds back, far enough to avoid collision but close enough to provide immediate support. The pilot, a lieutenant named Sarah Okonkwo, was one of the few other women in Naval Special Operations aviation. She flew with the same aggressive precision as Kira, the two of them forming an unspoken bond forged through shared experiences in a male-dominated field. Phantom 1, Phantom 2, Okonkwo's voice came over the radio. You're doing great, like watching a master class. Kira allowed herself a brief smile. Stay sharp, we're not done yet. The valleys began to change character as they approached the target area. The wadis widened, the terrain becoming more rolling hills than steep mountains. This was both good and bad, easier to fly through, but less cover from radar. Kira stayed as low as possible, using every fold in the ground, every depression, every dry riverbed to hide their approach. Checkpoint Charlie, Chen said. 20 kilometers, ETA to target 15 minutes. Copy, all stations, this is Phantom 1. Approaching objective area, prepare for insertion. In the back, the SEALs stirred, final checks of equipment, chambering rounds, the quiet rituals of men preparing for violence. Kowalski's voice came over the intercom, calm and certain. Ready when you are, Phantom. The compound appeared on the horizon, a cluster of buildings against a cliff face, exactly where the satellite imagery said it would be. Kira's pulse quickened, but her hand stayed steady. This was it. No more simulations, no more rehearsals. Real mission, real consequences. She swung wide, approaching from the north where the terrain provided the most cover. The defensive systems showed no change. The Iranians still hadn't detected them. Surprise intact. So far. Chen pointed. LZ is clear, no visible hostiles. Kira brought the helicopter into a hover, a precise dance of controls that kept them stable 50 feet above the rocky ground. Dust exploded outward from the rotor wash, creating an artificial storm that would temporarily blind anyone watching. The crew chief kicked the fast rope out the door, and the SEALs were sliding down before the helicopter had fully stopped moving. 12 seconds. That's how long it took for Kowalski's entire team to exit the aircraft and disappear into the rocks. 12 seconds of vulnerability, 12 seconds when anyone with a rifle could have cut them down. But no shots came. Kira pulled the helicopter up and away, circling at low altitude, weapons ready, watching the compound through the forward-looking infrared. Phantom 2 had landed its team on the opposite side, the two elements now converging on the facility from different angles. Phantom 1, this is ground element, Kowalski's voice crackled. In position, beginning approach. Copy ground element. We have eyes on. No movement detected outside the compound. Through the FLIR, Kira watched the SEALs move, swift shadows flowing around the buildings, each man covering specific sectors, the choreography of the assault as precise as a ballet. They reached the main building's entrance. A brief pause. Then a controlled explosion, the door blowing inward, and the team was inside. 90 minutes, the clock had started. Time became elastic, seconds stretching into hours, hours compressing into instants. Kira circled the compound, her eyes scanning for threats, vehicles approaching on the road, reinforcements from the garrison town 20 kilometers south, helicopters scrambling from the nearest Iranian airbase. The defensive system stayed quiet. They were alone out here, isolated in this corner of Iran's vast territory. Phantom 1 ground element, first floor clear, 6 hostiles neutralized, no casualties our side. Copy ground element. More explosions inside the building, muffled by the walls. Breaching charges opening doors, flashbangs disorienting defenders. The controlled violence of a SEAL assault, fast and overwhelming, giving the enemy no time to organize resistance. Second floor clear, 10 hostiles down, still searching for Reeves. Copy. Kira's grip tightened on the controls. They'd been on target for 8 minutes. The longer this took, the greater the chance that someone would notice, that word would get out, that the quick reaction force would mobilize. Third floor contact, heavy resistance taking fire. The sound of gunfire carried across the radio, sharp and urgent. Kira's stomach clenched, but her voice stayed calm. Ground element, do you need air support? Negative, Phantom, we're handling it, stand by. More gunfire, an explosion, shouting in Farsi cut off abruptly, then silence. Third floor secure. 15 hostiles neutralized total. We have Reeves. He's alive but injured, preparing for extract. Relief flooded through Kira, so intense it was almost painful. Copy ground element, standing by for pickup. Be advised, Phantom, we triggered an alarm. Expect company. As if summoning it by speaking, the radar warning receiver lit up, multiple search radars going active, sweeping the area. The Iranians knew something was happening. Maybe they didn't know exactly what, maybe they thought it was an internal security breach, but they were responding. All stations, this is Phantom 1. Threat environment changing. We need to move fast. Copy, Phantom. Exfil in 2 minutes. Kira brought the helicopter back toward the compound, Chen already prepping the fast ropes. Behind them, Phantom 2 was doing the same, the two birds converging on the LZ from different angles. The SEALs emerged from the building at a dead run, carrying Reeves between them. Even from the air, Kira could see the journalist was in bad shape, limping, his face bloodied, supported by 2 operators who were practically carrying him. The helicopter touched down, the skids kissing the rocky ground. The SEALs were aboard in seconds, fast ropes abandoned, Reeves bundled into the cabin with practiced efficiency. Chen gave the thumbs up, everyone was in. Kira didn't wait. She pulled collective and the helicopter leaped into the air, turning hard toward the mountains, toward the escape route they'd planned. Phantom 1 is clear with package, Phantom 2. Phantom 2 clear, all personnel aboard. Then let's get the hell out of here. She pushed the helicopter hard, trading altitude for speed, racing back into the wadis that would hide them from radar. Behind them, the compound was already receding, smoke rising from the building where the SEALs had fought their way through 3 floors of Iranian guards. The radar warning receiver was screaming now, multiple threats lighting up the display. Iranian air defense was fully active, search radars sweeping, fire control radars trying to lock on. But Kira was already in the valleys, already hidden by the terrain, the helicopter disappearing into the mountains like water into sand. Phantom 1, ground element. Reeves is stable. He took a beating, but he'll make it. Best news I've heard all day, Kira replied, her focus still on the flying. The return trip would be just as dangerous as the ingress, maybe more so, now that the Iranians were alert. They flew through the mountains like demons, the helicopters pushing their limits, engines howling, rotors beating the air into submission. Kira's world narrowed to the path ahead, to the instruments, to the constant calculations of speed and altitude and fuel that would get them home. 30 minutes into the exfil, Chen spoke up. Phantom 1, we have company. Iranian helicopters launching from JASC-2 Mi-17s, armed. Kira's jaw tightened. The Mi-17s were older Soviet-era helicopters, but they were armed and they knew this terrain better than she did. Distance. 40 kilometers and closing. They're tracking our general direction. Can we outrun them? Negative, they're faster in a straight line, but they're not as maneuverable, Kira finished, and they won't fly as low as we will. She dove deeper into the wadi, the helicopter now flying barely 20 feet above the rocks, so low that Chen flinched every time they passed a boulder. The risk of collision was enormous, but the risk of being caught by the Iranian helicopters was worse. Phantom 2, this is Phantom 1. Break off and take a parallel valley, split their attention. Copy Phantom 1, breaking now. The two American helicopters separated, each taking a different route through the mountains, forcing the pursuing Iranians to choose. On the radar, Kira could see the Mi-17s hesitate, then split up as well, each following one of the fleeing helicopters. Now it was personal. One Iranian helicopter chasing her through terrain that would kill a pilot who made a single mistake. Kira flew like she'd never flown before, pushing the MH-60 beyond what the manual said was possible, threading through gaps that seemed too narrow, pulling maneuvers that would have failed a safety inspection. Behind her, Kowalski's team hung on grimly, trusting her to keep them alive. The Iranian pilot was good, Kira had to give him that. He stayed with her through turns that should have forced him to break off, matching her altitude, closing the gap. But he wasn't flying with the same desperation, the same absolute need to survive. He was a hunter. She was prey protecting her pack. That made all the difference. She led him deeper into the mountains, into valleys that grew narrower and more treacherous, into terrain where one moment of hesitation meant death. And then, as they screamed through a particularly tight turn, the Iranian pilot flinched. Just for a second, just enough. He pulled up, gaining altitude to avoid a cliff face. Kira stayed low, disappearing around a bend, and by the time the Mi-17 descended again, she was gone, swallowed by the labyrinth of wadis. Phantom 1, Phantom 2, shook my tail, how about you? Kira let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Phantom 2, Phantom 1, lost him in the mountains, proceeding to checkpoint Delta. Copy, see you at the coast. The rest of the flight was a blur of adrenaline and focus, every moment stretched tight with the possibility of discovery. But the Iranian helicopters didn't find them again, and the air defense network couldn't track them through the mountains, and finally they crossed back over the coast and out over the Gulf of Oman. Behind them, Iran receded into the distance, a hostile shore that had nearly claimed them but had ultimately let them go. Phantom 1, this is Reagan Strike Group. We have you on radar. Welcome back. Kira's voice was hoarse when she replied. Reagan Strike Group, Phantom 1. Request priority landing for medical. We have a package requiring treatment. Copy Phantom 1. Deck is clear, come on home. The carrier appeared on the horizon, a gray fortress on the blue water, and Kira felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. They'd done it. Against all odds, through hostile territory and enemy pursuit, they'd pulled off the impossible. Daniel Reeves was safe. The team was intact. The mission was complete. She brought the helicopter in for landing, the deck crew already waiting with medical personnel. As soon as the skids touched down, they were swarming the aircraft, pulling Reeves out on a stretcher, rushing him toward the medical bay. Kira shut down the engines, the rotors spinning down, the sudden silence after hours of noise almost painful. She sat there for a moment, her hands still on the controls, her body vibrating with exhaustion and relief. Chen looked at her. Hell of a flight, boss. Hell of a flight, she agreed. They climbed out of the cockpit into the bright sunlight of the Persian Gulf, into the organized chaos of the carrier deck, into a world that would never know what they'd just done. Kowalski found her an hour later, after the debrief, after the medical checks, after the adrenaline had finally worn off and left her feeling hollowed out and ancient. The Master Chief looked tired but satisfied, the expression of a man who'd completed a difficult job and lived to tell about it. "Wanted to say thanks," he said simply, "for getting us in and out. That flying back there, I've never seen anything like it." Kira shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing my job." "No," Kowalski said firmly. "That wasn't just doing your job. That was," he trailed off, searching for words. "That was the kind of flying that legends are made of. The kind people will talk about for years if they're ever allowed to talk about it at all." He extended his hand. Kira shook it, the grip firm and respectful. "You're one of us now," he said quietly. "Whether you want to be or not. You've bled with us, fought with us, saved our asses when it mattered. That makes you a SEAL in everything but the trident." He left before she could respond, disappearing into the carrier's corridors, leaving Kira alone with her thoughts. She thought about Morrison, about his question, "Do you know who I am?" She thought about the answer she'd given him, about competence overcoming assumption, about doing the work instead of arguing about the work. And she thought about what Kowalski had just said, about being one of them, about earning a place in a community that didn't give respect lightly. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask for. 3 days later, Kira was back in Coronado, back in her Spartan apartment, trying to readjust to a world where death wasn't a constant companion and split-second decisions didn't determine whether people lived or died. The mission had been classified at the highest level. Even the fact that it had occurred was secret. Officially, Daniel Reeves had been released by the Iranians as a goodwill gesture. Unofficially, a team of American operators had penetrated deep into Iranian territory, extracted him by force, and escaped without losing a single person. The intelligence community was still buzzing about it. The Iranians were furious, but couldn't admit what had happened without revealing how badly they'd been embarrassed. The diplomatic fallout was being managed at levels far above Kira's pay grade. All she knew was that Reeves was alive, recovering in a military hospital in Germany, and that she'd been the one to fly him out of hell. Her phone rang, Captain Webb's number. "Commander Vance." "Kira, I need you to come to my office. There's someone who wants to meet you." "Who?" "Just come, you'll see." 20 minutes later, she was walking into Webb's office to find him standing with a thin, bruised man whose face she recognized from intelligence photos. Daniel Reeves looked like he'd been through a meat grinder. His jaw was wired shut, his left arm in a cast, bruises covering every visible inch of skin. But his eyes were alert and grateful. "Commander Vance," Webb said, "this is Daniel Reeves. He wanted to thank you personally before he's transferred stateside." Reeves extended his right hand, the one that wasn't in a cast. Kira shook it gently, mindful of his injuries. He spoke through his wired jaw, the words slurred but understandable. "They told me you were the pilot. The one who flew through the mountains like you were part bird, part crazy person. Despite herself, Kira smiled. Something like that. I thought I was going to die in that place, Reeves said quietly. I'd accepted it, made my peace, and then your team kicked in the door and suddenly I had a future again. His eyes were bright with emotion. How do you thank someone for giving you your life back? You keep doing the work, Kira said. Keep telling the stories that need to be told. That's how you thank us. Reeves nodded slowly. I can do that, I will do that. Webb cleared his throat. Mr. Reeves needs to rest, but he insisted on meeting you before he left. They shook hands again, and then Reeves was gone, escorted by medical personnel back to his room. Webb gestured for Kira to sit. The operation has been reviewed at the highest levels, he said. Joint Chiefs, National Security Council, even the President got a brief. The consensus is that it was a complete success, tactically brilliant, 0 casualties, achieved all objectives. That's good to hear, sir. It's more than good, it's going to change things. Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. For years, there's been debate about women in special operations, whether they can handle the physical demands, whether they can operate in combat environments, whether their presence affects team cohesion. You just proved definitively that all of that is bullshit. Kira was quiet, letting him continue. The Navy is going to use this mission, classified as it is, as a case study. They're going to point to it every time someone says women can't hack it in special operations. They're going to use it to justify expanding opportunities, opening more doors. He paused. Whether you want it to be a symbol or not, Commander, you've become one. I just wanted to bring everyone home, sir. I know, that's what makes you perfect for the job. Webb pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. You've been selected for promotion to full commander, and you're being transferred to JSOC headquarters to help develop the next generation of special operations aviation tactics. Kira stared at the folder without opening it. Sir, I appreciate the recognition, but I'm a pilot. I belong in the cockpit, not behind a desk. You'll still fly, but you'll also teach, develop doctrine, train the pilots who will come after you. You've got knowledge and experience that the community desperately needs. He leaned forward. Kira, you can't be the only one forever. Someone has to pave the way for the others. Someone has to show them it's possible. She thought about Morrison, about his shock when he realized who she was. She thought about the other women who were trying to break into special operations, who were fighting against assumptions and stereotypes and institutional inertia. She thought about the pilots who died in that photograph in her quarters, about the responsibility she had to make their sacrifice mean something. When do I start? She asked quietly. Webb smiled. 2 weeks. That gives you time to finish up here and relocate to Fort Bragg. She took the folder, tucked it under her arm, and stood. Thank you, sir, for believing in me. I didn't believe in you, Webb said. I observed your performance and drew the obvious conclusion. There's a difference. She left his office and walked out into the California sunshine, feeling the weight of what was coming. A new assignment, new responsibilities, a new role in a community that was still learning to accept change. But as she walked, she felt something else too, a quiet satisfaction, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Morrison. My co made me get your number. I wanted to apologize again for being an ass, and to say thank you. I heard rumors about what you did. Can't confirm anything obviously, but thank you for your service. You're a badass. Kira read the message twice, then typed back, apology accepted. Stay safe out there, Marine. She pocketed the phone and kept walking, past the training facilities where Bud-S candidates were suffering through log PT, past the pools where they were learning to tie knots underwater, past the compound where the teams planned missions that would never make the news. Somewhere in the distance, helicopters were flying, their rotors beating a rhythm that she knew in her bones, that called to her like a song she'd been born knowing. She'd answer that call, tomorrow, next week, for however many years she had left before age or injury or luck finally caught up with her. But today, right now, she let herself just be Kira, a woman who'd made impossible choices, who'd flown through hell and brought everyone home, who'd proven that competence transcended gender, and that the only thing that really mattered was the mission. Do you know who I am? The question echoed in her mind, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had an answer that satisfied her. I'm someone who does the work, someone who brings people home, someone who proves by action what others only argue about in theory. That was enough. That would always be enough. The Pacific wind carried the salt smell of the ocean, and overhead a helicopter passed, its shadow crossing the ground where she stood, and Kira looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, watching it disappear toward whatever mission called it next. Soon, she thought. Soon that would be her again, flying toward the next impossible thing, the next crisis, the next chance to prove that sky had no ceiling except the one you accepted. And she had never been very good at accepting limits. The California sun beat down on Coronado, indifferent and eternal, witnessing the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, watching as a pilot who'd become a legend walked toward whatever future she would forge from the choices she'd made, and the missions yet to come.